This is Madmen Sports. We got two at the table, one on the phone. Diamond Dave is MIA. But to introduce Ryan Talbot of NY Up. Ryan, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. Big guest, probably our biggest guest yet. Honestly, this is your second time on with us, which we appreciate every time, and we love following you on Twitter. You're a great Twitter follow at Ryan Talbot Bills. You can catch him on Facebook, the Bills Mafia Facebook page, a constant poster of great content there. You can also follow at SyracuseSports.com for some content from Ryan as well. And you can also go to the Shout podcast with Matt Perino and Ryan Talbot to check out their biggest hits. They have big hits. They had a former scout on a couple days ago, or I guess at this point, a couple days ago. And then Doug Flutie on earlier this week. Huge interview.
Huge guest.
Yeah, Doug was a fun one. That's definitely for sure. And he obviously has his own podcast now, but it was nice to sit down with him and catch up about his time in Buffalo and then obviously what he's up to now.
Absolutely. And, if you go to that podcast while you're listening, and once you leave this podcast, you go to that podcast, or you've already listened to it, Doug went through some very intimate details about the Rob Johnson situation and what happened with the Bills as that unfolded. So great interview there. We can only hope to be half as good as that interview was. That was top-notch excellence right there by Ryan and Matt right there. So,
well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Of course. We're big admirers, I guess we could say. Side story. Jake and I, 2 weeks ago, put up a basketball hoop, and we were laughing to ourselves saying, we're just like Ryan and Matt put up the basketball hoop, because I got to the point where I needed the backboard on, just like Matt got to the point where he needed Ryan to help put the backboard on. So it was kind of funny how that worked out.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Those backboards are tough, by the way.
Yeah, we already messed it up, but we just left it because it was at 10 feet, so that was fine by me.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. The Bills are drafting this week. I guess we're under the 7-day span. By this time next week, we will have new Bills players to talk about. A crop of young, fresh NFL stardom ahead of us. And I don't know where they're going. I don't know where they're going to go on this pick. I don't know where they could go. There's almost everywhere besides quarterback would almost be, and punter and kicker would almost be appropriate for them to kind of tackle because of depth and because of how deep the starters are here. Jake, I know you wanted to kick it off with the most famous topic of Bill's Twitter and social media of what the pick might be. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you hear it everywhere. People both sides on the aisle. Are we going running back at pick 30, Ryan?
It's a great question. I wish I knew the answer to it because it would help me out a lot in terms of preparing some content for after the pick. But it's on the table. Brandon Beane was recently interviewed by Adam Shine on Adam Shine's radio show, and he said there are still running backs you would take in the first round of the draft. And he obviously named some of the premier running backs in the league as examples. Christian McCaffrey, who he played a role in drafting in Carolina. Alvin Kamara, he said, would be a player like that's worth a first round pick. Dalvin Cook is worth a first round pick in today's NFL. So can you get someone like that can be a dynamic game changer every time he touches it, someone that you can line up in the slot and play at wide receiver? Maybe that's Travis Etienne. It very well could be, and in a lot of mock drafts, he's still on the board around pick 30. So if they're going to do it, I think they're going to pull the trigger on a running back in round one because you're looking for something different than what you already have in the room with Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, to a lesser extent Matt Breida, because Breida's contract does not guarantee him a spot on this roster by any means. I think he has a shot, but it's not guaranteed, obviously. So you would have to have a game changer, though, and that's what Travis Etienne is. It's possible. I just think that when I sat down and I listened to Brandon Beane's press conference with the media, he said something along the lines of he's thinking long-term with this pick. And if I'm thinking long-term, I'm looking at the defensive line because you have Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison as your starters going into the season. They're both over 30. They're both entering the final year of their deals. And the only defensive end that I think you can say with certainty will be on this roster in the next few years is AJ Epinesa behind them. So you might want to add someone early at 30 at that position. You could also talk the interior of the defensive line Obviously, Star Lotulelei is still on the team's roster here for the next few seasons until that contract is up, just because of the way it was built, the dead cap, etc. But you want an option behind him, or they can rotate in with him this year. You might want to have another 3 tech that can alternate with that Oliver as well, depending on who's there, and that would most likely be a Christian Barmore. But if you're asking me right now to make a wager on what position, I would still say edge rusher.
Yeah, and that's going to be a super important position. As you said, there's a lot of guys getting older. Jerry Hughes still highly productive, but of course, we're not getting any younger there, and we're building a good foundation. We have a good foundation to make a push long term. So,
yeah, the defensive line is definitely structured for more of a, I mean, it's tough to say win now, but there's not much of a future on the defensive line. So when you bring up the fact that Jerry Hughes is kind of the guy there, and Addison's the guy there, and Star Lotulei's back, but how much longer will he be back for? Well, you don't really know what the outlook is going to be there. So I think it's really interesting when people talk about the defensive line being the kind of the focus there. So I really like that idea. Ryan, is there a pick that would really stick out to you? It would be a bad pick?
A prospect specifically to any position, or
probably position wise? Is there like a position where at draft day they go first round, 30th pick, they take the pick, and then you're like, I'm really scratching my head why they would touch that outside of quarterback, of course, because everyone would be like that. But do you feel like they're really shored up at a position that they wouldn't be able to take a player there and be an instant impact there?
I'm not sure they're short up at this position, but I think tight end would be a bad pick at the end of the first round just because of who would be available, who's still on the board there. Obviously, there's who seems like a once-in-a-generation type prospect in Kyle Pitts, but he will obviously be long gone before pick 30. And then after that, you have some decent options for day 2 guys, no one that I would touch, though, in day 1. So if they ended up with a tight end, I'd be scratching my head there a little bit. Offensive tackle, I guess I'd be scratching my head there too in round 1. I think you should still add a swing tackle or competition for a swing tackle at some point in this draft, but not round 1, especially because you have Deion Dawkins locked down for the foreseeable future. He is your franchise left tackle. He's that cornerstone on your offensive line. And then obviously you just re-signed Darrell Williams to a 3-year extension, so you have him on board for the next few years as well. So I guess those would be 2 positions that I would scratch my head a little bit. It is a deep O-line class. I wouldn't be mad if they added an offensive tackle on day 2, just because injuries can arise. Is Bobby Hart someone that you have confidence in starting? He has a lot of starting experience from his time in Cincinnati, but that doesn't always mean that he is a starter. He struggled. He really did struggle in his time in Cincinnati. Fans weren't sad to see him go, but I wouldn't go there at pick 30. Like I said, I think edge rusher makes a lot of sense, and cornerback too is another position where if the right player is available, you think that they fit your system. That makes sense too long term because you only have Levi Wallace to a 1-year extension. You still don't know what you have in Dane Jackson either.
Absolutely, and if the first round pick cornerback spot, it really intrigues me for a lot of different reasons because they have Trey White, so you're not really looking for a number 1 per se. I mean, who knows? Maybe you draft a guy who eventually becomes better than Trey White, but then, you're dealing with a whole nother ballgame there. But if you go cornerback in round 1, do you almost overpower your corner position there? Like you already have Levi Wallace, who's been a starter for as long as he's been on the roster for the most part, and he's back. He's on a 1-year deal. He's never the top flight cornerback that everyone's always talking about. People kind of pick on him, especially in offenses picking on him in specific against Trey White. So you'd rather throw on him rather than Trey, but he holds his own more often than not, honestly. Do you get over, if you take a 30th cornerback, you almost become rich and wealthy at corner. Do you then move maybe a Dane Jackson for a pick, or is he more important and more valuable to you there, and then maybe you move on from another player at the corner spot? I just feel like corner is a very, lack for a better term, sexy pick for a lot of people at 30, but aren't we already really solid at corner right now? Could we possibly, I don't know, go for D-line? That's why I kind of really like the whole D-line thought process, and I really like your thought process there, Ryan, about we kind of need a future there. So when Bean's talking about it, it kind of lines up that if you're drafting for future, D-line is where it's probably at. You already have Ed Oliver, and my biggest knock against the D-line pick would be that they've already used so many resources towards that pick because they have, a third-round pick in Harrison Phillips there. They have a first-round pick in Ed Oliver there. They've put money after money at Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. So that would be my only slight against a 30-pick D lineman is because you've already used resources. Even a second pick on AJ there. So that would be my only slight. They did go after J.J. Watt in free agency, so I think they are looking for the defensive line to a little bulk up there.
Yeah, it's going to come down to, in terms of cornerback, edge rusher, or another position. I shouldn't say definitively it's going to be one or the other, but it's going to come down to which they think would help not only short-term but long-term more. So, cornerback position, I don't know exactly who will be on the board at 30 because every year there's a few surprises. But it's possible that Greg Newsome is there, and I think he would be a really good fit in this defense. Eric Stokes, I know there's some people that are for and some that are against him. I like Stokes' fit in Buffalo. If you get the right prospect that it can eventually be cornerback number 2, whether it's immediately as a rookie or the following year, that's going to make your pass rush better because they're going to lock down the guys on the outside. They're going to make life difficult for the quarterback to get it to their preferred target. So it would take a weakness that you have up front and make it possibly a strength if they're shutting down those opposing wide receivers. So it comes down to, what do they feel about Eric Stokes? Do they like him enough that he could be the guy? Or like I said, Greg Newsome. I'm not sure Caleb Farley would be there, but even if he is, would the Bills roll the dice on him with the back issue? I love Farley as a prospect, but obviously there's some risk involved in that too. And then the other factor there too is Trey White is on a long-term extension, getting paid top dollar. You could bring in someone that would be on a rookie contract for the duration of that deal or for the majority of that deal, and you're not paying that other cornerback much money. In terms of Dane Jackson, who you mentioned, the one good thing about Dane Jackson is when he was drafted, they talked about his versatility to play on the inside or the outside. So even if you added a cornerback early and your goal is to have them compete immediately for a starting job, Asante Samuel's another one that could obviously be available at 30. That's been projected to the Bills a little bit. You can move Dane Jackson on the inside, have him compete with Taron Johnson, change your looks up a little bit too, depending on the personnel of the opponent that you're going against. So maybe Dane's a better fit in some matchups than Taron or vice versa. So there is a case to be made. I don't think that you would want to trade away any of the cornerbacks that you have on your roster if you take one at 30, just because it's such a valuable position and you're one injury away from needing that next man up. The Bills, though, year in, year out, have brought in a veteran to compete. And when all is said and done, Levi's generally won the battle each time. EJ Gaines obviously came in year one. He played great when he was healthy, but he dealt with injuries. They brought in Vontae Davis. He obviously only lasted half of a game before he called it quits. He brought in Josh Norman over the course of this time. So if they don't go with the cornerback in this draft early, I wouldn't be shocked if they added another one after the draft to compete. But again, I don't think you're necessarily going to move anyone to that cornerback position. But I do agree that defensive line makes a lot of sense. Like you said, though, they've invested a lot. AJ Epineza most recently, second-round pick, which was Buffalo's first pick last year after trading for Stephon Diggs. So you sit there and you say, okay, well, who's going to be on the board at pick 30? And I think these top-tier guys are gone. Jalen Phillips, even with the concussions, I think that he's long gone. I think that Azeez Ojulari is gone out of Georgia. I think Kwity Paye is gone. So you'd be sitting there, and you're going to be looking at that next tier, and there's some risk-reward. There's a Joe Tryon who opted out this past season, had 8 sacks as a sophomore the year before that, though. Spent this entire past season training, looked great at his pro day, posted outstanding numbers, and he kind of fits the mold for what Buffalo looks like in terms of a size, height and weight component to it, and he has a little bit of juice to his game too, and he's as well as being really good with his hands. There is, I'm trying to think of some other guys. There's Jason Owe. I have some issues with I know that he really popped in terms of his athleticism at his pro day. I know that he had a lot of quarterback pressures, a lot of quarterback hits, but he didn't get any quarterback sacks last year. And that's only one component to being a good pass rusher. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not quite sold on him as much. I would prefer Tryon over Owe. And then obviously there's Greg Rousseau from Miami. I like Rousseau. 19 and a half tackles for loss, 15 and a half sacks. In 2019, opted out this past season. Didn't necessarily look as great as I think some people thought he would at his pro day. But I think that there's something there in terms of that developmental. You could kind of use him a year in your rotation. You could force him onto the field. He could learn a lot from Jerry using Mario Addison. You could kind of unleash him the following season. So it's going to be interesting. There's going to be options at both positions if that's the direction the Bills go. But obviously, they could surprise us and go many other ways, too. They could go interior offensive line if they're thinking long-term with Mitch Morris, the concussion history. There's no, like you said, besides quarterback, punter, kicker, there's no limit in terms of what they can do because this roster is so well built that they could just truly go best player available on their board and kind of use them as depth. And if someone gets injured, hey, we just drafted this guy because we felt really good about his game, and that they can come in immediately as a rookie and contribute if need be.
And definitely, I think going best player available is an interesting kind of way to go about things. But let's say that they're not happy with the position of best player available. And we know Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane do not shy away from trading either up or down in the draft. We've seen it. So what are some interesting trade propositions that you've heard that you're kind of like, well, hey, that could be interesting. We could see that.
Yeah, if they were to trade up, because Brandon Beane said if there's a player that's kind of sticking on their board, they're not going to be afraid to try to trade up for them. So, and I'm not saying trade up to the teams or anything like that. I'm thinking early, but more realistically mid-20s if someone's there sticking out on their board. I think they'll go earlier than this, but like a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, linebacker position is sitting there. Well, the Bills generally only run the two linebackers in their base defense. They have Milano that's back. They have Tremaine Edmonds. But Owusu-Koramoah, one, is just a great player in general, and he stands out in terms of who could possibly be there in those 20s. You can use him in a lot of different ways. He could be that tight end eraser that you really could need this year, looking at obviously the Patriots added in free agency, knowing that Miami has already a pretty good tight end, and they could possibly add some more weapons on that offense around Tua this year. They want to be able to defeat the Chiefs in the long run, and phasing out Travis Kelce is a part of that. So, and Owusu-Koramoah makes sense in terms of a trade-up option. And in terms of trading down, one thing that Mike Kay, who writes for one of the affiliates of NYApp and Syracuse.com at NJ.com, mentioned that the Bills moving from 30 to 37, I believe, and adding Zach Ertz in that deal. So move down 6 or 7 spots, add a premier tight end to your roster. And then at 36, 37, if you want one of those running backs, there's a case to be made that one of them could still be there. There's a case to be made that there's still going to be a developmental edge rusher. There's still going to be a solid cornerback. You're not moving down far, and you're adding talent to an already potent offense. Now, do the Bills still have interest in Zach Ertz? I'm not sure. They obviously added a tight end free agency that Josh Allen knows very well from his time at Wyoming. I think they still are very high on Dawson Knox. Good prognosis about Tommy Sweeney in terms of the heart condition that was developed after he had COVID. They're expecting him to be a full go. If they're happy with that run, well, maybe that's the way they keep it. But that's an intriguing trade down option. Brandon Beane, I think every GM in this league this year might be more willing to trade down just because of the uncertainty of these prospects and these picks, not seeing some of them on film for a year. So whereas Brandon Beane has been more aggressive in the past, I could see him trading down and trying to add 2022 assets because you're expecting a full college season, more tape, more film, scouts being able to go out and watch those players, have a better feel for who you're getting. So I truly do think everything is on the table this year, including a trade down from Brandon Bean.
And that's interesting, acquiring more 2022 picks with Sean McDermott and Brandon Bean's ability to retain a lot of their guys. I would say that we're in the best position possible to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, this roster is already pretty loaded. If you're only moving down 6 spots, you're still getting a good prospect now, but you're still going to probably get a day 2 or in that case, that specific example I gave you, a Zach Ertz type player. It's worth the gamble if you can add those picks in 2022 when you feel more confident about the scouting process.
Absolutely. Now, Ryan, on more of a personal note rather than, what you're feeling the Bills would do, is there a prospect that you kind of hope that the Bills would like add to the team at this point in like your research or anything along those lines? Just a player that kind of sticks out to you that, man, I wish he was a Bill. Obviously, we all want Kyle Pitts or Micah Parsons, but is there someone that, if the Bills are having to pick between about 6 guys and he's one of them, you kind of hope that they kind of go that way on him? Is there anyone that sticks out to you that way?
Not anyone specifically, to be quite honest with you. If and Uziel Lajari were to fall somehow, some way, I really do like his film, his tape. I like him a lot. But no, there's no one specific that I would sit there and say, oh man, this guy from the Bills have to go that direction, round 1 or round 2, anything like that. So I think that the Bills are going to be in good shape. So there's going to be a lot of talent out there. I think there could even be 1 or 2 talented wide receivers that fall. And you could make the case that if the Bills don't want to lose their fastball, add another wide receiver to this room. You might not think that it's a need right now looking at that roster, but Emmanuel Sanders' contract comes off the books next year. He only signed a 1-year deal. Isaiah McKenzie, 1-year deal. Cole Beasley, I expect him to play out the duration of his contract, but he's in a very similar situation to where John Brown was 1 year ago, where if for some reason he deals with injuries, is not as productive, the Bills can get out of that contract at the end of 2021. So if there's an Elijah Moore sitting there that you think could really be that special talent long-term in the slot, dynamic, breakaway speed, make you miss, the yard after catch guy, sure. If a Kadarius Toney falls, long-term opposite Stephon Diggs, that's an appealing option. He has some issues with drops there too, though, so far from a perfect prospect, but I just think that with the way this roster is built, the way that Brandon Bean has drafted in the past, they're going to have someone come in, whether it's at 30, whether it's up a few spots or down a few spots, that can make an impact without being forced to necessarily start.
Without a doubt. And the roster, like we keep saying, everything we come back to, it's the roster's loaded. The roster's loaded. Now, how do I frame this? Do you think that the players that sat out, when I think of players that sat out last year, Jamar Chase comes to mind. Micah Parsons kind of, didn't really fully set out, but eventually was like, I'm out. Do you think that hurts the players at all in their value? Like, do you think that may affect them on draft day and no one's talking about it just because it's all smokescreen? Or do you think Jamar Chase is still the number 1 wide receiver and Micah Parsons is still the number 1 linebacker?
I think certain players at certain positions are going to be good. I don't think Jamar Chase is. I still expect him to be off the board easily in the top 10. I'm in the camp that the Bengals should add him in round 1 over an offensive line. I know Penei Sewell has been a very popular pick for them, but there's questions about him long-term at tackle. He might be more of a guard. Unless you feel like Penei Sewell is going to be a Quentin Nelson-type guard in this league, is that really where you want to go with a top 5 pick, or do you want to go with someone that you think can be a premier, true number 1 wide receiver in this league and add him to a roster that already has some talent in the wide receiver room? I know they added T. Higgins last year. They obviously have Tyler Boyd, who was a hero for the Bills Mafia a few years ago, and when they broke the playoff drought because of his touchdown score. I would lean with Chase, being reunited with Joe Burrow, so I don't think he's going to be hurt. Micah Parsons, I think, could slip not far, but he could be in that 10 to 15 range. Whereas if he possibly had played, you might have been talking about him as a surefire top 10 pick. There are some questions about his coverage ability compared to a Owusu Koramoah or some of these other prospects. Obviously, a lot jumps off the page when you watch Micah Parsons play before he opted on this past year, but there's questions there. Obvious, Caleb Farley was once a top 5, top 10 pick. Now you throw the back issues and the opt-outs in. Who knows there? Tryon, Greg Rousseau at defensive end. I think if both of them would have played, that you would be feeling more confident about them being first-round picks, where they could both fall into day 2.
So that kind of opens up, because I agree. I think that maybe we see, maybe not complete fall-offs, but maybe we see a huge slip. So maybe if we, I don't know, this is more of a pipe dream than a situation that might actually happen, but if Micah Parsons is there at 21-20, that fifth-year option is kind of expensive for Tremaine Edmonds. Maybe we go up and get Parsons. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you grab him and then you cut A.J. Klein. Maybe you have 3 linebackers that are complete studs. I don't know. That's more of a pipe dream than anything. I don't even know how it would work. I just want Micah Parsons on my team and then other teams. So that's what sticks out to me. And then kind of as an offseason as a whole, Ryan, is there a point or a pickup acquisition that you think that the Bills, like from free agency, any move that they've made that really sticks out to you that think like that's my favorite move or that's my favorite move for the Bills this offseason? Is there a favorite move so far for you?
That's a great question. I don't know if any of them stand out as being like this. Oh, what a great move for the team. I like Emmanuel Sanders. I think that they've obviously flirted with adding him a few years now. But he will be 34, so you wonder when they're going to hit that wall. And F.A. Obata, I'll go with him. I just love his story. I know he's going to be 29 this year, but he was the best pass rusher, or one of the best pass rushers, in my opinion, the best on Carolina's roster last year. Sacks, getting after the quarterback. And when you hit that age, you're like, well, that's probably their ceiling, but it really isn't for him. He didn't play football until he was in his early 20s. He has this, unbelievable story where he was trafficked. He was really from Nigeria. He ended up being abandoned in London, goes into foster care, and then ends up playing like the semi-professional football. He's in an international program, pathway program, and is the first player out of that program to make a 53-man roster. So he already has this tremendous story. We've talked a lot about Buffalo's defensive end position and a lot of the potential issues that could arise there long term. Maybe he steps up, whether or not the Bills go edge rusher in round 1, round 2, and really proves that they were right to add him. I think he was a sneaky signing based on the fact that he has not hit his ceiling despite his age.
Absolutely. Like you said, he doesn't have football miles on him. You know what I'm saying? He's so fresh in the whole, I mean, you think about what the guys now go through, college, high school, everything back. Those really add up, take a toll. But he's fresh. He's a fresh 29, which we all hope to be. But he's got some years left. He's got something that he's got plenty in the tank, is what I would say. And maybe he's part of the long-term solution at the D-line. They're definitely playing with a lot of different things, which I think they kind of have to, because as we mentioned earlier, they put a lot of assets into this D-line. I think after a certain point, you have to stop bringing more talent in and start looking at like, what can we do with the talent we have right now? What are we doing that we aren't executing correctly? So I think that might be something that the Bills look at there, and maybe he's part of the solution there. Maybe you get him in the rotation, you're starting to get a little bit more active at the D-line. And listen, the Bills have great defensive backs. You're going to have time to get to the quarterback. How do we effectively get to the quarterback?
I agree, and I just feel like the Bills this season, it's not going to come down to what they do in the draft. It's going to be a lot of those players taking the next step. You need Ed Oliver to have his breakout year this year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You need to see what you thought you were going to get out of him when you drafted him in the top 10 when he fell into your lap. You hope that the return of Star Lotulelei, true one tech, really helps him in that, where he can go after the passer, because Lotulelei is still able to take on multiple blockers. But Lotulelei also opted out last year, so who knows there? Maybe it's a one tech that they have to add in the draft that helps free that up, Brett Oliver. You need to see Dawson Knox take the next step. You need possibly a Dane Jackson to step up, depending on what they do at cornerback in the draft. There's a lot of these young guys that it's like, okay, this is your time to shine. Cody Ford obviously comes to mind on the offensive line. He's a guy that's dealt with injuries early on in his career, but Brandon Beane still seems very high on him. He's the favorite to start at left guard, but he has to prove it in camp because there are guys like Forrest Lamp who they signed in free agency that could compete for a starting role. A lot of people were very high on him when he came out a few years ago, but he's dealt with injuries himself before starting all 16 games 1 year ago. If it's not one of them, maybe it's someone that's been waiting in the wings for Buffalo to step up there. Obviously, Ike Butker was a player last year that when his number was finally called upon, he stepped in, and I thought he played better as the season went on. So you need your young guys to step up. I thought Gabriel Davis had an outstanding rookie year. You're going to need him to step up, though, and take the next step, too. So those players ascending into their roles, into expectations is going to be just as important as whatever they do here Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in the draft.
I'm certainly excited. I can't believe we're already there. I mean, it seems like just last year we were doing the draft and waiting for the second round pick, and we got AJ and we got Zach and we eventually got Fromm and Gabe and Isaiah. I mean, they draft well, so well that I'm excited because before you were excited because you were hoping for the Bills to get the next star on their team. Nowadays, they've drafted so well. They're such a well put together team, defense, offense, whatever, that I'm excited to get more key players on this team at this point. Before, I was excited for drafts because, is Doug Whaley going to finally get me a franchise quarterback? But now we have one, and now I'm looking for, am I going to get the guy that's going to take me over the hump? I was one game away from a Super Bowl. How do I get over the hump? This is the class that has all the expectations that these are the guys that are going to get us over the hump for this year, next year, and years to come. This is a bright future team, and it's exciting and kind of interesting. It's more than interesting than exciting, I'd say, because this is the best time of the year for adding a talent to your team in different spots.
Yeah, that's well said. Like you said before, it was top 10, top 12 picks, hoping to land a franchise quarterback or a franchise player in a position. Now it's just all about maybe finding that missing piece or two that can take you from the championship game to the Super Bowl. So it's an exciting time to be a Bills fan. You're going to have to brew some coffee or drink some energy drinks because they're probably not going to draft until close to midnight if they stay at pick 30. So you're going to have to stay up pretty late to see who that first pick is that Buffalo drafts.
Yeah, I'm willing to say that the worst case scenario on draft night might be that we get to pick 30 and they trade out. That might be the worst case scenario.
There will be some upset if that is the case. Depending on obviously the haul. And if it ends up being a larger haul than some expect, I think there'll be some that are okay with it. But yeah, that would be very frustrating, especially if you're someone that stayed up and you have to go to work the next morning, just to find out that you could have gone to sleep hours ago for sure.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And so let's kind of walk away from the Bills a little bit. Let's talk about the WWE real quick. Diamond Dave, huge WWE fan. Wish he was here.
He texted me like 5 times today. Like, just make sure you ask these questions.
Yeah, he wants to know. His first question is, are you team? I'm not totally engulfed in the NXT AEW stuff, but he wants to know, is it NXT or AEW? And do you have an opinion on one or the other, I think? Maybe I'm framing the question wrong.
I actually do enjoy AEW quite a bit, but my son isn't familiar with a lot of those guys. He's actually been really big into NXT for a few years now. So and I know NXT now is on Tuesday nights, but when they were going head to head, we generally watched more NXT because he was familiar with that entire roster and that entire crew. So for my son's sake, it's been NXT in that regard. But I think that AEW has put together a great product. I like that roster. Obviously, they took a lot of to make the AEW roster. A lot of the top independent acts, obviously, and there's nothing wrong with that. The Young Bucks obviously have been in Ring of Honor. They were overseas a lot. So you bring in someone like that, Adam, Hangman Page, but then you add those WWE superstars, the name recognition of the Moxleys and the Cody Rhodes, obviously, and players like that. And it's a good mix. It helps you bring in those casual WWE guys, but also helps them learn more about these other wrestlers that were superstars elsewhere in the world. So I do like that roster a lot. I like where they're at. I like that there's competition because that generally brings out the best in everyone. Although the WWE is sitting pretty after that deal that they made with Peacock to get the network over there and the amount of money that they're making off of it.
Absolutely. I get to delete one of my apps finally. So, and then even on top of that, I don't watch NXT. I used to. I don't. But when I do fancy a midweek wrestling, I love the product that AEW has put together. I like the roster. I like that they're creative. And, there's only so much the WWE can do that they haven't done. They've been looking for a shot in the arm for a while. They're doing this whole head of the table thing with Roman Reigns. He also wanted me to ask if you acknowledge Roman Reigns as head of the table.
I do. I think this is the best work that Roman Reigns has done in years. I think WWE was long overdue to turn him heel just because the reaction he was getting from the crowd. And maybe it was just waiting for the perfect storm because this has been outstanding, having him linked up with Paul Heyman, giving, Jey Uso the chance to shine with his brother still rehabbing from an injury. It really has been really good for the product on SmackDown. SmackDown has by far been the better of the two mainstay shows for the WWE. Raw has been a bit of a mess. When I watch those back with my son, I don't know what they're doing, what they're thinking, but it's funny. You said that they need a shot in the arm. I just think that things are maybe over-scripted there. And when WrestleMania took place that first night, there was the thunderstorm, and there was a little bit of a delay. So what did they have to do? They had to have their wrestlers cut these promos, and they were not scripted. And I thought that the majority of the wrestlers cut promos that were better than what they usually say on screen when they have these bullet points that they have to talk about, or they're heavily scripted to the point where it's not themselves, their character. So I was kind of hoping that because of that thunderstorm, that they'd sit back and they'd say, these interviews that Kevin Owens is a great talker no matter what, but even Braun Strowman, who I don't consider someone to be great on the mic, I thought what he said in that limited time wasn't outstanding, but it was better than half of these hands interviews that he has to kind of say script wise every time that he's on the mic.
Absolutely. I almost think that them ridding themselves of the Brock Lesnar storyline for a little while will kind of help spice it up. Like they took Heyman from Lesnar and now they're bringing him over to Reigns, and I think it's a little bit better of a pairing, and it kind of fits Heyman a little bit better because Brock wasn't he's probably already peaked. Reigns has so much more ceiling to kind of touch on. I really like even the product he brings and his whole, shtick, I guess. I think Reigns at this point, we've already seen Lesnar. He's been kind of regurgitated a couple times now. Heyman with Reigns I think is a perfect match for the WWE, and hopefully they can kind of carry that through and build around it.
Yeah, and it comes down to availability too. And no one's faulting Brock Lesnar. If you get a sweetheart deal when you're told you only have to show up to TV or pay-per-views 10 times per year, whatever it was, no one can fault him for taking that. But that also hurt the product because you have the belt on him and he's hardly there. And Heyman is as great as can be, but there's only so much he can do to push storylines. So, the best thing about Roman Reigns is he's there. You're not making him wrestle every show. You're making that. But he's still coming out every SmackDown. He's still cutting promos. He's still getting agitated at the person he's in the program with. So he's still involved. And that's what you need, and that's what they were missing with Lesnar when he was the champion he was there.
Absolutely. It was, maybe 5 years ago, I saw Lesnar. He was in Buffalo, and I was like, I can't believe he's actually here. He's never around. He became kind of a mythical figure of like, I wonder if Brock's going to be here this month. So, it really hurt the product that they allowed him to just not be there to, push the storyline any further. So, kind of changed that into Reigns, and I think he really drags everything along a little bit better. He's been in some movies. I think he's a little bit more marketable at this point than Brock Lesnar is. I think we've kind of had our fair share of Brock Lesnar, at least in my eyes.
I agree completely with that assessment. No argument from me.
That's good. Absolutely. So this is a Saturday. I don't want to waste much more of your Saturday. We did run a little bit longer, which I do apologize for. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on to Madmen Sports. I hope you enjoy the draft, and hopefully maybe we can talk about the draft maybe in a month or so with you if you're available. But if not, we'll talk I'll tweet at you and we can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Anytime, and thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. Catch Ryan at NYUp and Syracuse.com and check out the Shout podcast with Ryan Talbot and Matt Perino. Thank you so much for watching and take care.